And so I'm Henry, and
I'm Andrea.
And we are two of the many people involved in this thing. So thanks everybody for making it at 8:30 on the first day. It looks like everybody is here, which is amazing. Give yourself a round of applause for getting up at 8:30. So let's just start out with showing what this thing is. So this is an iPad, iOS, Android app, also virtual reality. And so you can, I guess, see what's going on here. Maybe. Andrea is moving the iPad around, and the way in which she's moving it is controlling what's on screen. So there's no sort of pushing buttons. The motion of the iPad is doing something interesting with the motion of you through the space. So, okay, can we switch to the other podium, please?
And for those of you who want to follow along, if you have a device, like a phone, yes, you can go to hypernom.com and do the same thing I'm doing.
Okay. So yeah, it works on iOS, it works on Android, it works on VR headsets, if you happen to have one. So many people involved in this. This is a virtual reality game or experience or something that uses the orientation of the VR headset to do something interesting. So any kind of object, so here I've got a camera or an iPad or a VR headset, has 3 degrees of freedom in its orientation. And so the idea of Hypernom is to use those 3 degrees of freedom to move you through a space. So what are all of the set of all orientations of an object in fact fits inside of a ball. So let me prove that to you. So we're going to start with some sort of set start orientation, start position for an object. And any sort of change in the orientation of an object you can think of as rotating around some axis. So I've drawn like this vertical axis here, and if I say rotate the object by 90 degrees, then I'm going to associate that to the point which is on this same axis in the ball, but up by, say, pi over 2. So let's say this is a ball of radius pi. And if I rotate by 180 degrees, then that corresponds to the point up at the top of that axis. I can go back down the other way. So if I rotate the other direction, that means going sort of rotating by minus pi over 2 and minus pi. But notice that this point down here and this point up here, they both correspond to rotating by 180 degrees, and that's the same orientation. So these two correspond to the same orientation of the iPad. And so that means that it's a ball, right, because I could choose any axis I want, but opposite points of the ball are glued to each other. And so the notation for that, or to, like, what is this space? This is real projective space, RP3. You might be more familiar with the real projective plane, RP2. This is where you take a 2-dimensional disk rather than a 3-dimensional ball, and you glue opposite points on it. Okay, so it turns out RP2 is double covered by the ordinary sphere, the 2-sphere. So if I take 2 copies of this RP2 thing and I glue the edges together in the right way, then you get the ordinary sphere. And in the same way, if I take 2 copies of this 3-dimensional ball with opposite points that are supposed to be identified, but instead glue them to the other ball, then I get the 3-sphere, whatever that is. It's the sphere in 4-dimensional space. Okay, so how do we draw something on screen? So we use stereographic projection. So this is a picture of taking the 2-dimensional, the ordinary sphere in 3-dimensional space, and mapping that down onto the 2-dimensional plane. In the same way, you can take the sphere in 4-dimensional space and map it down to 3 dimensions, so we have something we can draw on screen. So what do? So if I want to draw a picture of a cube on the plane, first I have this cube inside of the sphere, and I sort of blow it up, or I radially project it to make a beach ball version of the cube, and then I project that down onto the plane, and now I've got a sort of curvy version of the ordinary cube in the 2-dimensional plane. In the same way, we're going to go up a dimension. So this is what you get when you do a hypercube. You go from the hypercube in 4-dimensional space, you radially project it onto the sphere in 4-dimensional space, and then you stereographically project that to 3-dimensional space, and then you can see something. So that's what's on screen, except we're not going to use the hypercube, we're going to use the 120 cells. So can we switch to the the camera just for a second? There we go. So you may have seen this. This is a 3D printed model of the same thing. This is half of the 120 cell. So this is a four-dimensional sort of version of the dodecahedron. And so we're going to use that for one of the versions of Hypernom. So maybe you can switch to the podium over here just to show that again. There we go. So what's going on here, what you're seeing again is this projection of this four-dimensional dodecahedron, otherwise known as the 120 cell. And so that's what you're seeing on screen, except that when you get close enough to one of the cells, you eat it. So it's Hypernom. I should explain why the name. Hyper as in hypersphere, and nom as in nom nom nom. So you're this sort of four-dimensional Pac-Man or something. So let me just very briefly tell you sort of there's this amazing connection between the symmetries of the ordinary dodecahedron and the 120 cell, what we just saw there. So this is the instruction manual. How do you go about eating all the cells? You have to get the orientation of the iPad to match up with where the cells, the dodecahedra of the 120 cell are. So here's this sort of schematic picture of the stereographic projection. And here's one dodecahedron right at the bottom of the south pole of this sphere in four-dimensional space. The neighbors of that one dodecahedron, the ones that are right next to it, correspond to a rotation, right? When I do a rotation, I move through this space, and I get to where there are more dodecahedra. And that corresponds to the symmetry of the dodecahedron rotating by an angle of 2 pi over 5 around one of these edges here. And the next layer of dodecahedra corresponds to this rotation by 2 pi over 3 around one of these points of order 3. And then there are another layer of these things that corresponds to rotating by, I guess, pi over 5, or twice that? Something like that, whatever it is. Twice whatever the orange was gets you these ones. And then this is rotating by 180 degrees. So anyway, what I want you to take away from that is that the symmetries of the dodecahedron correspond to the positions of the cells in the 120 cell. And this is some magical coincidence about 3- and 4-dimensional space. Anyway, so Hypernom.com works on iOS, Android, and desktop. How do you win? You actually have to get the iPad or the VR headset to all orientations possible twice because of the double cover. And in the last 3 minutes...
All right. So I'm going to start just by rotating it a little bit to see if we can... We're going backwards. We're try and rotate it a little bit so you can see that's the first one. There's the second one, third one. And as we move forward, you can see as we approach the dodecahedra, as Henry just mentioned. And then we can keep going because it's a double cover, and I can accidentally lock the screen.
Whoops.
You need to unlock it.
Uh-oh, it's sideways. Stop. That's my code, everybody. So one thing you notice is as you're twisting it around, when you've done 360 degrees, you're not done. You have to go around another time to get back to where you started because of this double cover. This is pretty fast to do on an iPad, although it's tricky when it's plugged into a cable because it all gets twisted up. It's a little harder to do with a VR headset because you have to do all of this kind of thing. How much money are we losing? Because how long do we have? A minute. I guess you can just cut us off when it gets harder when you're sort of running out of dodecahedra to look at, because then you have to sort of find them. Are we done yet? No?
No, there's this one over here, and then...
Oh, and there's one over there.
And there's one, and that's way on the other side, actually. Probably, yeah, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
I'm good at telling when you're actually seeing them.
Yes! All right, we're done. Thank you.
Thank you.